President Nelson had long had this conviction that the name should be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as opposed to Mormonism.
Yeah, that wasn't a surprise.
So then what is anticipated, without having a crystal ball, what is anticipated about the Dallin Oaks presidency?
Okay, so
Hello, Saints. My name is Jeff. I'm a pastor in Utah, exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm joined in this video by Dr. Casey Griffiths from Brigham Young University. Thanks for being here.
glad to be here. Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
I put up the bat signal for Casey, like yesterday, as my kids were saying, a new first presidency just dropped, and I have so many questions. This is a very interesting time for the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's bittersweet in a lot of ways. Last week, my wife and I were able to attend President Nelson's funeral and to spend some time just Latter-day Saints, just as you guys were walking through that season. And now, as the page is turned, new first presidency was announced, and I just have a lot of questions, and you were the first person that came to mind for me to ask those questions. And one of the reasons for that is because I went to BYU Education Week last year and sat in on one of your talks where you were talking about succession going all the way back to Carthage, Nauvoo, and beyond.
Yeah.
With that, help me understand, first and foremost, we have 3 men who were announced as part of the first presidency. And in some ways, I wasn't surprised with President Oaks. In one way, I was halfway surprised with President, would it be President Eyring?
President Eyring. Yeah, they're all referred to as presidents.
Okay. Yeah. And I was a little bit surprised that President Christofferson.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to help me understand, first and foremost, what is the process that is undergone in a moment like this where you have a sitting president who's passed away and decisions need to be made?
Yeah. So the best short summary I've heard of succession in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints comes from one of our past presidents, Gordon B. Hinckley, who was asked by Larry King, this interviewer, how do you become the president of the church? And President Hinckley said, you get made a member of the Quorum of the 12, and then you outlive everybody else. And that's
okay,
it.
so it really is
Yeah.
who has lived the longest or served in the Quorum of
Who
the
has
12?
who has served in the Quorum the longest?
Okay. Okay.
And there's a lot of particulars. For instance, Russell M. Nelson and Dallin H Oaks were both called as apostles at the same time.
Okay.
And so
Roundabout what year?
In 1984.
Okay.
So
Wow.
So if you're calling 2 apostles simultaneously, you could be. I mean, they literally were calling 2 future presidents of the church, and they're called at the same time. So how do you determine seniority in that situation? And the tradition in the church is that seniority is determined by age.
Has it always been that way?
It's been that way since the first Quorum of the 12 was called in 1835.
No kidding.
Yeah, so they called 12 apostles simultaneously in 1835 and just decided that since they were all called at the same time, seniority would be determined by age within the quorum. And that precedent has remained down until this day.
And so that applies to Brigham Young?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So then when President Nelson passed away, I would even say prior to him passing away, it was a foregone conclusion that President Oaks would be the next in line.
Yeah, pretty much.
And what sort of formalities surround making that official? So in other words, since September 27th, when we lost President Nelson, what procedurally was taking place to make that official?
Yeah, so President Nelson was 101 years old and lived an amazing life, but his health was starting to struggle. Only in my understanding is a few months before he passed away. So the order of leadership in the church is, as long as the president of the church is still with us, the other counselors in the first presidency take over. So basically, President Nelson can't function, but he's still with us. The first counselor, who was Dallin H Oaks, is the leader of the church effectively. When the president of the church passes away, the first presidency dissolves immediately. And the counselors in the first presidency go back into the Quorum of the 12 in order of seniority. Now, Dallin H Oaks just happened to be the most senior apostle. So he was leading the church as the first counselor. And then when President Nelson passed away and the first presidency was dissolved, he became the leader of the church as the president of the Quorum of the 12 apostles.
I had been told that there are 3 individuals who were most likely to be part of the first presidency once things dissolved and were reset. President, or I guess it would just be Brother Holland or Elder Holland, Elder Bednar, and Elder Uchtdorf. From what I understand, Elder Holland has been, is it the president over the 12? Is that how you word it?
Yeah, so he was the next most senior apostle after Dallin H Oaks.
Okay.
And so because Dallin H Oaks was serving as a member of the First Presidency, Jeffrey R. Holland was the acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
Okay.
And so if we're going in seniority, if anything happened to President Oaks today, Jeffrey R. Holland would be the next president.
So I know there's a lot of fan energy around Elder Uchtdorf. I know he's a fan favorite, especially at General Conference.
Yeah, he's just really lively and has a really great personality. And he was in the First Presidency. So
was it under Monson?
He served in the First Presidency under President Monson. And then when President Nilsson became president of the church, President Nilsson just expressly gave his thanks to Elder Uchtdorf for his service, but said that because he and President Oaks had such a close relationship, and given the fact that Russell M. Nilsson was 93, he felt like it was important for Dallin H. Oaks to be a counselor. And that might have been because of the closeness of their relationship. It was probably also because, given President Nilsson's age, he knew there was a really good chance that Dallin H. Oaks was one day going to become the president of the church. So he wanted him to be in the First Presidency to know how it works. And then President Eyring has just been a counselor in the First Presidency for about 17 years.
Okay.
And typically, unless there's health issues or some other challenges, counselors in the First Presidency stay to maintain continuity.
Okay.
But they don't have to do it that way.
Right.
That's just what they've done the last little while.
So then lastly, talk to me about President Christofferson.
Okay.
Because I know very little about him. I've heard a couple talks that he's done in General Conference. Other than that, I know very little about him.
He is a great mix of kind of this doctrinal legal mind, but also somebody that can tell a story and inject pathos into a sermon. So he's a lawyer by profession. In fact, he was working, one of his earliest jobs was as a legal clerk for the judge that was investigating Watergate.
Oh, wow.
He was 2 or 3 people away from the investigation that basically ended Richard Nixon's presidency.
Interesting.
He became a general authority. Even before he became a member of the Quorum of the 12, I noticed his sermons. He gave excellent talks on the nature of priesthood, on the nature of quorums. He's a great explainer when it comes to our doctrine of justification and sanctification. But he also has a really personal touch. Like one thing that I run into with Elder Christofferson a lot is that he has a brother, Tom Christofferson, who is gay. And Tom is a wonderful guy. I've met him on several occasions. Tom Christofferson is gay, and he's an active member of the church. He did spend years away from the church in a relationship in a same-sex relationship, and he and his brother, Elder Christofferson, stayed close. And when Tom decided to come back to church, he did so with the full support of his brother. And I think because of that, Elder Christofferson has also been more willing to engage on LGBT issues.
Interesting.
Because we sometimes look at the leaders of the church like they exist in a bubble and their families are
Sure.
perfect, when in reality there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Well, and that's especially interesting, being that President Oaks has, like you said, a specific interest in family.
Yeah.
And I've heard him do a couple of talks, even recently, on the proclamation, the family proclamation.
Yeah.
So that dynamic will be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all 3 of them have emphasized family, but that's not surprising because family is such a big emphasis
Sure.
in our church. But yeah, President Oaks is one of the last remaining apostles that helped compose the family proclamation. President Eyring was the newest apostle when the proclamation was issued. And Elder Christofferson has all these family connections that have caused him to be a great explainer.
So when President Nelson became the president, I'm assuming that there were certain things that he had already shared, presented through talks, through just his influence, that gave church members a pretty decent idea of the type of presidency it might be, or maybe some of the decisions that might take place. I think the one that has been most clearly explained to me was that President Nelson had long had this conviction that the name should be, there should be more intentionality around the name being the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as opposed to Mormonism.
Yeah.
So that wasn't a surprise when...
That wasn't a surprise. President Nilsson had emphasized that in several talks going back almost 30 years. And so when he made that an emphasis, I don't think very many people were shocked. But President Nilsson did do a lot of things that were really surprising. President Nilsson was 93 when he was made president of the church, and a lot of people figured that he would be kind of a caretaker, that would keep things going but not make any radical restructuring. But President Nilsson, and President Oaks has commented on this, was a very decisive person. Like by profession, he was a surgeon, and surgeons just have to make split-second decisions. So emphasizing the name of the church wasn't surprising, but then the next thing was we went from having a 3-hour block of church to having a 2-hour block of church, which we had talked about for years and years, but nobody had been willing to kind of make the decision. He changed certain ordinances in the way they function. Prior to President Nilsson, if you were performing a baptism, for instance, the witness had to be an adult male priesthood holder, a member of the ministry, essentially. President Nilsson said any member of the church can act as a witness, and that gave women and people who aren't in the ministry a larger role in performing ordinances. President Nilsson updated some of the ordinances that we do in the temple and some of the language there to provide a greater emphasis on Jesus Christ and to also make the background behind those ceremonies a little bit clearer. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like President Nilsson, everybody thought was going to be kind of a caretaker, but became one of the most consequential presidents we've had in decades.
Wow. So then what is anticipated, without having a crystal ball, what is anticipated about the Dallin Oaks presidency?
Okay, so President Oaks is a lawyer. He was a Utah Supreme Court justice when he was called as an apostle. He has a very clear legal mind. Like if President Nilsson is kind of a Peter, he's out there inspiring people and healing people. I would say President Oaks is kind of like Paul, where he has a very keen theological mind and is very interested in making sure that things are communicated clearly when it comes to our doctrine. In the first talk he gave in General Conference, and this was before the first presidency was reorganized, he said he wanted to emphasize family. And the quote that's used most commonly in my class from President Oaks is, our theology begins with heavenly parents. And so he's emphasizing this deep theological connection we have with our relationship to God being parental, father to child, essentially. And the other thing about President Oaks is he's very, very interested in clarity. So President Oaks has never shied away from really difficult subjects. He's given conference talks on abortion, divorce, the plan of salvation. But usually his conference talks are kind of like a legal brief. Like, today I'm going to talk about divorce. Point A, okay, a lot of people get divorced, and that's tough, and it happens for tough reasons. Point B, divorce isn't the best thing, right? And sometimes we're getting divorces when we don't need to. Point C, if you haven't gotten married yet, here's what you can do to avoid getting a divorce. And I love the way his mind works. Like when I'm teaching a class, a Dallin H Oaks talk is usually what I go to if I want to have like the comprehensive breakdown.
Right. You can bullet it out very clearly.
Yeah, and he like one major thing between our churches is the whole "Have you been saved?" question, right?
Yeah.
Dallin H Oaks gave a talk where he said, "I wish to answer the question, have we been saved?" And then he was like, there are 6 types of salvation to Latter-day Saints. And he goes through each one, essentially, and explains what it means, like salvation from sin, salvation from death, salvation from the fall of Adam. And then at the end he says, so we can say that we have been saved with conditions. And everything is like crystal clear. He's just a really good communicator in that sense.
He sounds to me like he, in the Protestant evangelical world, would fit quite nicely in the systematic theology position at a school. Because even as what you're explaining right there, my systematic theology, mine from classes I took in grad school, are like, oh, he's discussing the various aspects of the atonement and salvation and redemption and reconciliation and all these things. So that's great insight into his mind, because it sounds to me like he is a very intellectual and very logical thinker, whereas it makes sense then why, though he was able to make quick decisions, President Nelson, there was just so much pathos in there. Like, he was very passionate. He was very inspiring in a lot of ways, from what I've gathered from church members. And so it's going to be an interesting kind of shift to hear how some of that then begins to play out. What are you hoping for people like me, people who are outside of the church? What are you hoping will be seen or communicated? What certain aspects of Latter-day Saint faith, or even the trajectory of the church right now, are you hoping a strong message or a clearer message is sent to other people who are of faith or other Christians through this presidency and the direction the church is going?
Well, what I'm hoping is that we maintain our integrity. And there's no better person I can think of for that to Dallin H Oaks. Like, he is willing to say the hard things and sit down with someone and say, I just don't know if we can compromise on these particular ideas. At the other end is he is willing to compromise. Like, he's a great bridge builder. And sometimes he's not always depicted as such, but
he is very stoic.
He comes across as a little bit more stern than President Nelson, right? Like, President Nelson would get up and say, "We're building 20 temples."
Yeah,
and President Oaks gets up and says,
"The big smile, my dear brothers and sisters."
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he loved that.
Yeah.
And then it was so classic at conference that President Oaks got up and said, "We're not going to announce any new temples.
Right.
We got to get the temples done that we've built." Like, that's classic Dallin H Oaks. At the same time, too, there's a measure of humanity to President Oaks that I don't know if a lot of people get to see from his public persona. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with Thomas Griffiths, who's a federal judge who's been friends with Dallin H Oaks for years and years. And he told me that people that meet President Oaks in person are often surprised at how warm he is.
Yeah. Well, that's super helpful. I appreciate you just giving me the insight, giving me the lowdown as somebody who's not part of the church, and watching all this unfold has been very intriguing to me and my wife. And not just from a procedural standpoint, but even I know that this is very personal. There's a vibe about how all this is unfolding that feels very personal to almost every member that I've talked to.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you articulating that. So, thanks again for answering my questions. And I'm going to be really interested to see how these next few months and years then unfold with a different leadership, but at the same time maintaining, to your point, the continuity that I know that everyone is really passionate about within the church. So, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and you can support me on Patreon if you'd like to even see an extended version of this talk. And why don't you tell people real quick about some of the stuff that you're working on?
So I work with a podcast called Church History Matters, and we do thorny topics in Latter-day Saint history.
You press the hot buttons.
We press the hot. We go there.
You go there.
We go there. And I also help with a video series called Restoration Revealed, where we visit church history sites. But I also love to reach out to churches and do interfaith work. There's a group at BYU called the Council for Interfaith Engagement. I know you've come and spoken to us. But anybody watching this, we'd love to build bridges and make relationships with new churches. I went to a different church's general conference last weekend.
Oh, nice.
And so it's just a wonderful thing that I get to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I love it. Appreciate it. I'm sure you'll see Casey again here on Hello Saints. And until next time, see you later, Saints.